The first thing I noticed was the silence. Not the quiet kind that soothes you, but the heavy kind, the kind that feels like it's pressing against your ribs, making every breath too loud, too obvious. I was standing at the edge of the driveway, my suitcase handle digging into my palm, when my mom leaned halfway out the car window. Her voice was soft, almost rehearsed, like she'd said it in her head 100 times before. "There just isn't enough space this year, sweetheart. You understand, right?" The words hung there, fragile and dangerous, like glass about to shatter. I nodded too quickly, pretending to. My lips managed a smile, but my eyes, well, that was harder. That was the moment, the gaze moment, when my father and I locked eyes in the side mirror. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. His silence carried more weight than any excuse my mother could have given. It was a silence that said, "We chose without you." In my other hand, I held the old compass my grandfather gave me years ago. Its brass surface was scratched and tarnished, but the needle still swung, restless and stubborn, like it knew there was always a direction forward, even if I didn't. I clenched it in my fist, hard enough that the ridges left faint marks on my skin. It wasn't just about the retreat. It was about what the retreat represented. Every summer, the family cabin was supposed to be the place where laughter echoed off the wooden walls, where cousins whispered secrets under mosquito nets, where stories by the fire stretched so late that even the stars seemed to listen. And now, it was a place I wasn't allowed to belong. The car pulled away slowly, the red glow of the taillights smearing across my vision until they blurred into the dusk. I stood there, still, rooted, like if I didn't move maybe time would rewind and I'd hear them call me back. But the road stayed empty. The house behind me was just as quiet as the street. Too quiet. I could almost hear the faint ringing of absence. I don't know if you've ever felt it, that moment when you realize you've become invisible to the people who are supposed to see you most. It's not a sharp pain. It's not even anger at first. It's more like being hollowed out, like a chair pulled out from under you when no one's looking. That night, I sat by my bedroom window, compass in hand, and watched the moon float above the rooftops. I traced the tiny scratches on the brass case with my thumb, thinking about how something could be weathered, dented, even overlooked, and still point true north. Maybe loss isn't always about something taken away. Sometimes, it's about what's uncovered when everything else is stripped back. I remember whispering, half to myself, half to the night air, if there's no space for me there, maybe I'll make space somewhere else. And that's where everything began. Sparkles, have you ever felt like the person you love the most suddenly became a stranger? That's the kind of question that lingers, the kind that makes people pause before they scroll away. I didn't sleep much that night. The house felt cavernous, like the walls themselves were echoing with the absence of voices. You don't notice how much sound a family makes until it's gone, the clatter of dishes, the hum of conversation that leaks under doors, the thud of someone pacing upstairs. Now it was just the ticking of the hallway clock, stubborn and slow. I held the compass in my hand under the blanket, as if it could anchor me. The brass was cool against my skin, and I kept imagining my grandfather's voice when he first pressed it into my palm. Wherever you go, this little thing will tell you the truth. Even when people don't. Back then, I didn't really understand what he meant. I thought he was just being old and poetic. But lying there alone, the words felt heavier, sharper. The next morning, sunlight leaked through the blinds in strips. I padded into the kitchen barefoot, and for a moment, I almost forgot. The table was set with just one plate. Mine. A glass of water sweating into a ring on the wood. I traced the ring with my finger, as though by completing the circle I could summon everyone back. That's the strange thing about memory, it doesn't just come back in images, but in textures, in sounds. I remembered last year at the retreat, how the cabin kitchen smelled of burnt coffee and pine sap, how my cousin's laughter bounced off the beams, how my mom hummed while she fried eggs for a dozen hungry mouths. And then, layered over it, this kitchen now, empty, still, quiet enough to make the air feel thick. It struck me then, the kind of truth people don't like to say out loud. Sometimes you can be surrounded by family and still be left out. Later that day, I found myself in the garage, where dust settled like a second skin on everything. My grandfather's old fishing rod leaned against the wall. Next to it, a box of camping gear, lanterns, sleeping bags, the kettle with the dent from when someone dropped it on the rocks years ago. I knelt down and opened the box. The smell of old canvas and firewood clung to the air. My hand brushed over a frayed rope, and suddenly I was 8 years old again, tugging that same rope during a game of tug-of-war by the lake. My father's voice behind me, urging me on. His hands on my shoulders when we fell laughing into the sand. It was a memory that stung now, not because it was bad, but because it was good. And sometimes, good memories hurt the most when you realize you don't know if they'll ever come back. I sat there for a long while, holding the compass against my chest. I don't know if you've ever done that, held on to an object not because of what it is, but because of what it represents. It becomes more than metal or wood. It becomes proof that something once mattered, that you once belonged. That evening, I tried calling them. The phone rang and rang before my mother picked up. Her voice was light, distracted, like she was already half-turned toward someone else in the room. I could hear muffled laughter in the background. "We're just sitting down for dinner, honey. Can I call you later?" I wanted to say, "Save me a seat. Even if I'm not there." But the words never came. Instead, I just said, "Okay," and listened to the silence that followed after she hung up. It was the silence of doors closing. That night, the compass sat on my desk, its needle twitching every time I shifted in bed. I thought about what it meant to be lost. Was I really lost, or was I just not where they wanted me to be? Sometimes I wonder if every family has cracks they don't talk about. Little fractures that grow, so quietly you don't notice, until suddenly you're standing on the wrong side of them. I pressed the compass open again and again, watching the needle insist on its truth. Somewhere, I thought, there's still a direction that belongs to me. And maybe, just maybe, that was the beginning of something I hadn't yet understood. Sparkles, isn't it strange how the places we thought were permanent can suddenly feel like they don't exist anymore? The compass kept me company in ways my parents didn't. Each night, I'd twist it open, listening to the soft scrape of the hinge. The needle quivered, pointing north with the kind of certainty I wished I had inside myself. It became a ritual, the last thing I saw before sleep, the first thing I touched in the morning. But the longer the retreat stretched on without me, the heavier the silence between us became. It wasn't just about space anymore. It was about something unspoken. Something I didn't yet have the courage to name. One evening, I sat at the dinner table alone. The plate in front of me was clean, untouched, I wasn't even hungry. Across the table sat the empty chair my father always used. I stared at it longer than I meant to, imagining him sitting there, his elbows resting heavy on the wood, his voice carrying some offhand story about the lake, or how slippery the rocks had been. The chair didn't answer back. That's when it hit me, it wasn't just that they'd left me home. It was that they had chosen to move forward without me. And here was the dilemma, was I supposed to forgive that? To understand it, like a good kid who always accepts the parent's word? Or was I supposed to finally admit the truth simmering in my chest, that it felt like betrayal, even if they'd never call it that? Loyalty or truth? Love or honesty? Sometimes those words don't fit together neatly, no matter how much you try to force them. A few days later, my phone buzzed with a photo message. It was my cousin, a shot of everyone crowded around the fire pit at the cabin, marshmallows glowing like tiny lanterns in the flames. My mother was laughing, her head thrown back. My father's hand rested on my cousin's shoulder. For a moment, I saw myself in that photo, not actually there, but reflected in the gap between two cousins, as if that's where I should have been sitting. It was the invisible mirror, showing me not what was captured, but what was missing. I stared at the image until my eyes blurred. Then I turned the phone face down on the table, the screen buzzing with notifications I couldn't bring myself to check. The weather turned later that week. Rain beat against the windows, streaking the glass with crooked rivers. I sat by the window, listening to the storm. The house felt like it was groaning, every gust rattling the frame. Inside, I felt just as unsettled. My thoughts kept circling. What did I do wrong? Did I make myself too small, or take up too much space? Was there something about me they couldn't carry with them? It's a strange kind of pain, the kind where you're not sure if you're being punished or simply forgotten. I found myself in the garage again, digging through the camping box. My fingers landed on the kettle, the dented one. I picked it up, holding it under the dim bulb. The dent caught the light like a scar. And I thought, is this how they see me? Damaged, inconvenient, something better left behind? But then the compass in my pocket shifted as I bent, the needle twitching stubbornly toward north. Something steadied in me. Maybe scars don't mean useless. Maybe they mean survival. Still, the next time my mother called, I didn't answer right away. I watched the screen light up, her name glowing like it always had. My chest ached with wanting to hear her voice, but my hands stayed frozen. When the call went to voicemail, guilt pressed down on me like a weight. That was the other side of the conflict. As much as I wanted to speak my truth, I also couldn't bear to sever the thread completely. No matter how much their silence hurt, the thought of mine hurting them back was unbearable. Love can be heavy like that. It binds you, even when it's bruised. That night, I sat in the dark kitchen, just me and the compass on the table. The rain still pressed against the glass. I whispered aloud, though no one was there to hear it, if love is supposed to make room for you, what does it mean when there isn't enough? And for the first time, I realized the question wasn't just about them. It was about me, too. Sparkles, have you ever had to choose between protecting your heart and protecting your family? The rain didn't stop for days. It came in steady sheets, drumming against the windows, soaking the garden until puddles turned into small lakes. The whole house smelled faintly of damp wood, like an old cabin left untended. I found myself staring out the kitchen window one evening, a fork resting on my untouched plate. The food had gone cold hours ago, but I couldn't bring myself to move. The only sound was the flickering bulb above the sink, buzzing faintly every time the wind rattled the power lines. The silence was unbearable. I wanted to scream, but the sound lodged somewhere deep in my chest, swelling like a tide with no release. Instead, my eyes burned, and I pressed my palms flat against the table to keep them from shaking. That's what grief feels like sometimes, like screaming in silence while the world outside keeps carrying on. The phone rang again that night. My mother. I let it ring until the screen dimmed into darkness. Then, seconds later, my father's number flashed. My thumb hovered over the green button, trembling. I wanted to answer, to hear his voice, even if it was just small talk about the weather at the lake or how the fish weren't biting. But another part of me was terrified. Because what if he didn't mention me at all? What if the only words were about them, their laughter, their retreat, their joy, and nothing about the space where I should have been? I couldn't decide which would hurt more, the sound of their silence, or the proof of it. So I let it go to voicemail. Again. Later, I sat on the floor of my room, the compass open in my hands. The needle quivered steadily, refusing to lose its direction. I whispered into the quiet, "Tell me where to go." Of course, it didn't answer. But in that stillness, I thought about my grandfather again. The way his hands trembled when he held the compass out to me. The way his eyes lingered, like he was giving me more than an object, like he was giving me permission. Permission to search for something beyond what others allowed. And suddenly, I wondered if he had felt the same kind of loneliness once. If this compass wasn't just about direction in the woods, but about direction in life, when family falters, when belonging shifts, when love feels like it leaves you behind. By the third night of rain, my chest ached from holding back tears. I wandered into the living room and collapsed onto the couch, curling into myself. The cushions smelled faintly of pine cleaner, and I closed my eyes, pretending it was the scent of the retreat cabin instead. I pictured the fire pit, the circle of cousins, the marshmallows melting onto sticks. My father's laugh mixing with the crackle of the fire. And then, right at the heart of that memory, the missing place where I should have been sitting. It was like looking at a family portrait where someone had been erased, leaving only an outline in the space where they once stood. The breaking point came quietly. Not in a scream, not in a fight, but in a whisper that escaped without my permission. "I don't know if I belong anymore." Hearing it out loud shattered something in me. My hands shook so badly that the compass slipped from my grip and clattered onto the floor. The sound echoed too loudly in the room, like a crack in glass. I bent to pick it up, fingers trembling. The needle still pointed north, steady, unbothered by my chaos. Somehow, that steadiness broke me even more. Because if the compass could keep pointing, what excuse did I have for being so lost? I sat there for hours, the lamp flickering above me, shadows shifting across the walls. My thoughts spiraled, torn between love and betrayal, loyalty and truth. Should I keep waiting for them to notice my absence? Or should I take the compass's silent lesson, to stop waiting and start moving, even if it meant stepping away from the only family I knew? The choice was forming inside me, raw and heavy, but not ready yet. The house creaked with the weight of the storm outside, and I pressed the compass against my chest. My heartbeat thudded against the brass, the two rhythms colliding like they were arguing with each other. Somewhere between them, I felt the next moment rising. Something had to give. Sparkles, have you ever realized that the loudest break doesn't come with a crash, it comes in the silence, when you finally hear your own truth? The storm finally broke on the fourth morning. I woke to sunlight streaming through the blinds, sharp and golden, almost mocking in its brightness. The streets outside glistened, puddles shrinking into cracks in the pavement. But the quiet inside the house hadn't changed. I shuffled into the kitchen, poured myself cereal I didn't want, and sat staring at the milk softening the flakes until they turned into mush. That's when my phone buzzed. It wasn't my mom this time. It wasn't my dad. It was a group message. Family Retreat 2023, photos, dozens of images loaded one after another. The lake, sparkling under the morning sun. The cabin, windows wide open. My cousins in matching shirts, all smiles, their arms slung over each other's shoulders. And then, my parents. Side by side, faces glowing with the kind of joy I hadn't seen from them in months. There was no empty space in those pictures. Not on the dock, not at the fire pit, not in the crowded living room. They had filled every spot. Without me. And that's when it hit harder than before, they hadn't just forgotten me. They had replaced me. The compass sat on the table beside my bowl. For the first time, I didn't see it as a guide. I saw it as a weight. A lie, almost. Because what good was true north if the people who were supposed to be your home decided they didn't need you? I slammed it shut and pushed it away. The sound was sharp in the empty kitchen, like a door slamming. That's when my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a single message from my mom. "We're so proud of you for being independent this week. It's good practice for the future." I froze. Independent? That word twisted inside me. It wasn't kindness. It wasn't reassurance. It was a confession. This whole thing hadn't been about not enough space. It had been about testing whether they could move forward without me. And they had. I carried the compass with me into the living room and sat down on the couch. My hands shook as I held it, the brass warm now from my grip. I remembered my grandfather's voice again, the way he had said, "This little thing will tell you the truth. Even when people don't." Back then, those words felt comforting. Now they cut deep. Because the truth wasn't something I wanted to face. The truth was that my parents had made room for a life where I wasn't in it. Later that night, the phone rang again. I didn't want to look, but I did. It was my dad this time. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Hey, kiddo," he said, his voice bright, casual. Too casual. "How are you holding up?" I stared at the darkened TV screen, my reflection faint in the glass. "I'm fine," I lied. "That's my girl," he said. His words echoed something he'd told me years ago, when I scraped my knee on the cabin rocks and he'd knelt beside me, saying the exact same thing. Back then, it was encouragement. Now, it was dismissal. A time loop echo. Same words, but stripped of their warmth. I felt something collapse inside me. "I saw the pictures," I whispered. There was silence on the other end, just for a beat too long. Then he sighed. "We didn't want you to feel left out." I almost laughed at the cruelty of it. Didn't want me to feel left out? And yet here I was, sitting in the quiet, the proof of my absence framed in every smiling photo. The compass slipped from my lap, hitting the floor with a dull thud. I didn't reach for it this time. Because maybe I didn't need it anymore. Maybe I had found my own truth. I couldn't go back. Not to the way things were. Not to the way I used to cling to every scrap of belonging they offered. Something inside me shifted then. A breaking, but also a rebirth. I sat there long after the call ended, the compass face down on the carpet, the needle still spinning beneath its lid. For the first time, I didn't care where it pointed. Because the question wasn't about North anymore. The question was about me. Who was I, without the space they refused to give me? And in that question, I knew I had crossed a line I couldn't uncross. The part of me that still believed their words, still hoped for a seat at the table, was gone. Sparkles, sometimes the cruelest betrayal isn't when they push you away, it's when they smile as though you were never missing. The house was too quiet. The kind of quiet that presses against your chest, the kind that makes even your breathing sound out of place. I remembered how this had all started, with me standing in the driveway, suitcase in hand, listening to my mother's soft excuse, "There just isn't enough space this year, sweetheart." Back then, I believed her. At least part of me did. But now, after the photos, after the calls, after the silence, I knew the truth. There had always been space. Just not for me. The compass still lay on the carpet where I'd dropped it. I picked it up slowly, brushing dust from the brass cover. The hinge squeaked as I opened it, the needle twitching toward north as faithfully as ever. But this time, I didn't feel guided. I felt released. That night, I made a choice. I packed a small bag, not much, just enough to carry without weight slowing me down. Clothes, a notebook, the compass. I left the untouched food on the counter, the empty chair at the table, the flickering bulb above the sink. Those things belonged to the version of me who kept waiting for an invitation. Outside, the air was cool and sharp after days of rain. The street lamps cast long shadows across the pavement, and the puddles glimmered like broken glass. My footsteps sounded louder than they should have, like the world was listening. And maybe it was. I walked to the bus station at the edge of town. I didn't know where I was going, not really. But that was the strange comfort of it, I didn't need to know. For once, the uncertainty wasn't punishment. It was possibility. As I waited on the bench, I flipped the compass open one last time. The needle quivered, restless, like it had always been urging me forward, not back. I smiled, an unexpected smile, small but real. Thank you, I whispered, not to the object itself, but to the person who gave it to me. To the grandfather who must have known that one day, I'd need it not for finding trails in the woods, but for finding a way through the silence. And then I did something I never thought I would. I placed the compass on the bench beside me. Because I realized I didn't need it anymore. The bus headlights appeared in the distance, cutting through the night. My phone buzzed in my pocket just then. I pulled it out. A message from my mother. We'll be home soon. Can't wait to see you. I stared at the words, my chest tightening. Can't wait to see you. It was almost funny. Because after everything, I couldn't tell if she meant it, or if it was just another way of smoothing over absence with words. But here was the twist I hadn't expected. For the first time, it didn't matter. The sting was still there, yes. The ache of betrayal, the fracture in the bond. But woven into it was something new, an acceptance that maybe I couldn't change their choices, but I could change mine. The bus hissed to a stop, the doors folding open. I stood, slung my bag over my shoulder, and left the compass behind, its needle still pointing north as though it were keeping vigil for me. As I stepped onto the bus, I glanced back one last time. The compass glimmered under the street lamp, small and unassuming, but steady. It looked less like abandonment and more like a marker, a sign that the person who had stood frozen in that driveway was gone, and someone else had taken their place. I slid into a seat by the window. The bus engine roared to life, pulling me forward. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was screaming in silence. I felt like I was breathing. The driveway. The silence. The words, there just isn't enough space this year. I heard them again in my head. But now they sounded different. Because maybe there hadn't been enough space for me there. But out here? Out here, space stretched wide open. Sparkles, sometimes the place you're searching for isn't the one you're left out of, it's the one you decide to walk toward. The bus rumbled forward, its windows shivering with each bump in the road. I leaned my forehead against the glass, watching the town roll away in fragments, familiar streets, familiar houses, each one slipping quietly into memory. The compass was still on that bench. I could picture it perfectly, glinting faintly under the street lamp, its needle forever pointing north. For years, I'd held it like a lifeline, waiting for it to tell me where to go, how to belong, what to believe. But now I understood. It was never about the needle. It was about me. The bus stopped a few towns over, and I stepped into the cool night air. The streets here were unfamiliar, lined with cafes still glowing with late customers, bookstores closing up, strangers laughing in clusters outside. The world felt wide again, bigger than the walls of my house, bigger than the retreat that had shut me out. I found a small diner at the corner. Inside, the air smelled of coffee and fried onions, and a waitress with kind eyes pointed me toward a booth by the window. I sat there quietly, hands wrapped around a mug of tea. For the first time in days, I ate, not out of obligation, not just to fill the silence, but because I wanted to. The food was nothing special, grilled cheese, pickles on the side, but it tasted like the start of something. There was no one across the table. No father's elbows on the wood. No mother humming in the background. Just me, and the steady hum of strangers' conversations. And strangely, I wasn't lonely. I was simply present. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the blinds of a cheap motel room. I lay awake for a while, staring at the cracks in the ceiling. My phone buzzed on the nightstand with new messages, some from my mother, one from my cousin, even one from my dad. I didn't open them. Not out of anger, but out of peace. Sometimes, silence is a wound. Sometimes, it's a boundary. And this time, it was mine. Later that day, I wandered into a bookstore. Dust motes swam in the sunlight pouring through tall windows, and the smell of paper was sharp and comforting. I picked out a journal with a plain leather cover and sat in the corner, writing down everything, what it felt like to be left behind, what it meant to choose yourself anyway, how love can hurt but also heal in ways you don't expect. The compass wasn't with me, but somehow, its absence didn't ache. If anything, it freed me. My grandfather's gift had done its job, it pointed me toward truth. And truth had led me here, to the act of beginning again. Days passed like that, quiet, simple, full of small firsts. A conversation with a stranger at a bus stop. The discovery of a park where children played under sycamore trees. Nights spent on benches watching the sky spill with stars. Everywhere I went, I carried the memory of my family, not as a wound that kept bleeding, but as a scar I could trace without flinching. I realized something then. Sometimes the family we are born into teaches us what love should be, by showing us what it isn't. Weeks later, I returned briefly to the town where it all began. I walked past the bus stop. The bench was empty now. The compass was gone. Maybe someone had taken it, maybe it had been thrown away. But instead of sadness, I felt a strange comfort. Because if someone else held it now, maybe it would guide them too. Maybe they'd understand what I had come to learn. True north isn't always a place. Sometimes, it's a decision. That evening, I stood in the driveway where the story had started. The same cracked pavement. The same silence, pressing against my ribs. Only this time, there was no suitcase in my hand. I gazed at the empty street, my reflection faint in the car window. And instead of waiting for someone to call me back, I whispered the words I hadn't been able to say before, there's enough space for me. Just maybe not here. The wind carried it away, soft and certain. As I turned to leave, I felt lighter. The silence was still there, but it no longer felt like it was pressing me down. It felt like room. Room for breath, room for choice, room for whatever came next. Sparkle's final reflection, maybe the hardest part of growing up isn't leaving others behind, it's realizing they left you first, and choosing to walk forward anyway.